Welcome to Circling Dialogos and my conversation and dialogue with Thomas Steininger. More about this amazing conversation in a moment, but first there's some exciting announcements. So the big one is the next Circling and Dialogos course taught with John Vervaeke, Christopher, and myself is happening on July. Oh, what was the date again? It's going to be July 9th and 10th, I believe. Yeah, July 9th and 10th. That's 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time till I think 4 o'clock. And on Saturday and Sunday, the 9th and 10th. It's open for registration now. There's a discount up until 2 weeks before the start of the course. This is the third time that we're going to be doing it. We're refining it more and more each time. It's a work in progress, and I am really excited about this, and I look forward to seeing you there. We also have an Explore Circling Weekend Intensive, and that will be on June 18th and 19th. That's Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. till 7 p.m. both days. This one is about the part of circling that's about deeply getting another's world. So all the cool stuff about like a radical listening and really seeing someone and being deeply permeable and affected and being able to be a profound reverence with other human beings and towards other human beings. So it's a remarkable experience. So that's June 18th and 19th. There's a discount on that too, 2 weeks prior to the course. We also have open events open to everybody. It's every Thursday from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All of this is on Zoom. And I also work with people one-on-one. So if you are interested in working with me one-on-one, go ahead and email me. Links for all of this is below in the show notes. All right. So this is my second conversation with Thomas. And this one surprised me in that we go pretty deep into his experience of what's going on in Ukraine from his standpoint of being a German living in Germany, which opens up into a whole world of kind of like the Russian point of view and the religious implications of what's going on in Ukraine for them. I was fascinated by this conversation and also deeply appreciated what a big deal it is for Thomas and for Germany to be, for the first time, to close relations with Russia, which they haven't done since the end of World War II. So it's literally that war demarcated the point of the end of the post-war era. And I've been I've been watching the news incessantly about this, and I've been asking myself, why am I doing that? And I think it was because I was realizing that I don't exactly know what I'm looking at when I'm watching the news about that war. Like, what is that? What is it really about? And I got so much more of a sense of it through this conversation. And which led into the role of dialogue into the future. You could say that one way to look at the way Russia is responding to the West is a regressive standpoint, right? And we talk about dialogue, both his practice of emergent dialogue, dialectic, and circling, that these start to get it into a progressive, right, response to the what's going on in the West. So that and so much more is happening in this dialogue. I hope you really enjoy it. I had a blast. All right.
Chris.
Yeah. So just to kind of like catch us up, because we've been rapid a little bit, just some context. We, talking about, I was asking you about what it's, what it's like, and you said it's a really heavy time, right? And being in Germany, with everything going on in Ukraine and the refugees, right? That you have one, in your place right now, and this I got this sense of like, oh, I got an insight into what it actually is like to be German, European, with your history, having a war like this be happening essentially on European soil. And also the German diplomatic relation to Russia has been in a sense has an apologetic aspect to it, in constantly being the one to maintain diplomatic relations, right, with Russia, right, in respect to what happened with Russia. And so to watch Germany break that, it's like what you, and I think what you said is like, to watch that happen is to watch the literally the end of the post-war, right? And then you talked about, because I've been saying about how obsessively I've been looking at what's going on with Ukraine, realizing, like, noticing how obsessive I am about it, kind of realizing I think I'm keep doing that because I don't know exactly what I'm looking at, right? And then you talked about this, it sounds like this terrifying thing, right? Profound thing in Russia, where you spoke of the Russian government built what did you say it was? It was a
Cathedral of the Russian Army.
Cathedral of the Russian Army. And they built it right at the site west of Moscow where the Germans were stopped, right?
Yeah.
And you said that so check this out, that the bottom of it was built with German tanks, like metal.
The steel of German. Metal from German tanks.
Yes, metal from German tanks. And even the dimensions had to do with 1945.
Yeah.
Right. And that the Russian saints were pitted with Russian generals and soldiers.
No, not generals, soldiers in combat.
So soldiers.
It's not just.
Yeah.
They depict them in combat. It's not just a portrait of a general. It's combat scenes in the cathedral of the Second World War.
Wow. And the Russian government wanted to paint mosaics of Stalin and Putin, but the public wouldn't raise too much mistake for that.
Yeah, that didn't happen in the end, but it nearly happened. So maybe to add some one detail that's also gives even more deep time context to that, because the Russian Orthodox identity sees themselves as the righteous Christians, basically the Catholics from a Orthodox perspective are the first Protestants.
Oh.
The real Christians are the Orthodox. And there's truth to that.
Yeah, there is, isn't there?
There's truth. The Catholic don't like that, but basically, when you look historically, the Orthodox Christians are the more original Christians.
Yeah.
As they developed in the first centuries, and not the Catholic.
Yeah.
And they, because Rome went Catholic, and Constantinople became Turkish, Istanbul.
Yeah.
They consider Moscow to be the third and last Rome.
Whoa.
And the whole architecture of Moscow as a city is built as a mandala with circles of monasteries around it. And in the center is the Kremlin, as the sacred space.
Oh my God.
Yeah. They built the whole city as a sacred architecture.
Oh my God. And so here's, oh my God. So this is...
So it's a different form of identity. And in that sense, our secular, modernist, godless culture is just basically what is decadent, and what they feel that they are the counter to. And as the modern, postmodern society is in a crisis of meaninglessness, it's not only wrong what they are depicting.
Totally.
I mean, it's a regressive version of it.
Yeah.
It's a fundamentalism, own form of fundamentalism.
Yeah.
But there's truth to that.
Right.
Also.
Right. So some of the basic claims, right, about the West, their critique of the West is uncannily accurate in many respects. Their response, though, isn't what I heard you say is that the response, the step into fundamentalism, is a regression based on the truth that they see, right? Which has all kinds of implications to it. Like one being the war that we're seeing, right? But there's a oh God, it's interesting. Now I'm starting to, it's funny, I'm flashing to all of me going back and looking at pictures on Fox News and then CNN and then MSNBC and then the German station, and kind of like these scenes, and I'm like, oh, this is what I'm seeing. This playing out.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, it's not the only level. There are many levels to it. There are just geopolitical levels, economic levels. It's all, but this deep cultural level is definitely a big part of it.
Right. Totally. And Putin's oomph. And Putin's, like, you can just bet, like, if Putin has God on his side, in fact, if he's sitting at the center, right, and if he's not God, he's the closest one to it. His justification for what he's doing, I can start to understand some of the decisions he's making and what they mean to him.
It's a different world.
Very
living in.
Very different world. Yeah. And also that strange way of how do you ever have communication with him, right? Or with the phenomena of him seeing the truth, something true about the postmodern West, right? Us coming and talking with him basically seeing the truth about that, but then responding with a deeper, one can argue a regressive response, right? That our very coming to talk with him is the very instigation of his in justification of his regression, right? That's a situation that's fundamentally seems eerie to me.
And to make a connection to our dialogue work.
Yeah.
Because there's something that is for me very much connected with that. Particularly because there's some truth, the way I understand how fundamentalists are responding to the abyss of godlessness, loss of the sacredness in postmodern secularism. And it's not just Putin. I mean, Modi in India is doing the same thing. Erdogan in Turkey is doing the same thing. And in Iran, they're doing the same thing. It's all a version of fundamentalist sacredness against the godless West. And what I see is happening in this dialogue movement, let's call it that way, Dialogos, is for me also I'm using John's word now, a reinventio of the sacred in the openness of dialogue as maybe a sacred core of what also the value of an open society is about. That an open society does not need to be just about open markets, just about neoliberal values or Wall Street. It is about the mystery of coming together as humans and more than humans in the openness. So I see all these forms of dialogue that are emerging right now also as a response in our search for the sacred in a new way, or again with John's word, as a religion without religion. And in that sense, that's something that I feel emotionally very connected with. To find a higher synthesis of this contradiction between postmodern valuelessness, but also openness. And there's also a lot of things that I appreciate about that, but I see also how it doesn't have any depth and lost connection to meaning. And these attempts of regressive societies like Russia to basically go back to something because they're scared of the abyss of the West. And the necessity to find a higher integration. And I see in the dialogue work a potential for that touches the sacred in a different new way. That's also appreciating the openness of the open society.
And I think a couple of things. I found it really interesting, like right when you started talking about that, like my son started screaming in the background. Right? It's like, so there's a mother-son thing going on in the background, and like, I don't know, there's something synchronistic to me about that, or meaningful about that. But I have a 7-month-old baby in the house. But
That's cool.
And I one of the things I got from our last conversation about your work, right, in some sense, was because it's also, this is, you can hear Heidegger, or especially at the, like in what starts with the contributions, right, start to grapple with the same thing, right, that you're talking about, like in some sense, I think he foresaw postmodernism, right? Some say he caused it, right? He definitely, his thinking made it possible or something. I'm not exactly sure how to think about that, but like he was already in the thinking that perhaps made it possible, was already responding to that possibility through thinking, right? Through the thinking, right? And so to hear you talk about, right, and make this connection, to where you thought that maybe what you were doing with Emergent Dialogue, right, is in some sense an enacting outful attempt, right, of the practice of Heidegger's whole thing about the gods, the mortals, earth, sky coming together, and that in that sense of like that, you know, this coming together of the fourfold, granting the what we call thinging, right? In some sense is him trying to articulate, if there's not a ground, if there's no ground to the thing, right, but rather there's a grounding or something more dynamic happening that isn't grounding beings but unfolds them, right? And how does that happen, right? Where does the stability come from? Where does the intelligibility come from? And you can hear, my sense is like, that's why it's so difficult to understand those texts. I was just appreciating the fact that you understood them at all, let alone have a practice to attempt to realizing that you're actually like methodologically developing a method that is in some sense acting this out, right? Or trying to bring this to life, which was, it's like gives me the goosebumps is an understatement.
But you're really hitting the point also, how, or the way I understand what he was after was not anything static, a ground, but a grounding.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's German. And the static would be, just to kind of like, just so I can make sure that we're following each other, but the static would be, something static would be, that would be the metaphysics, right? That would be, yeah. So the unstaticness simultaneously represents the overcoming of metaphysics, or the of Western metaphysics anyways. Yeah.
Because there is also difficulty in translating Heidegger in a different language. For example, the German word, when he talks about the Wesen, like the Wesen, the Technik.
Yeah.
It's quite often translated in the essence of technology, but that's quite some wise Heideggerians make the point how this is a very wrong translation.
Yeah.
Because Wesen, the way, is much more an essencing.
Yes.
Than an essence.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
And there is some. I mean, the point is, someone like him, he had a very poetic intelligence that he kind of built on Hölderlin. He used the language he was working with very much with a rootedness where the language comes from. So not kind of an artificial definition of something, but where words are rooted in their own history of words. Basically, where words are coming from deep time, how they develop as a language. And there's something about where he goes, where it is exactly about letting go of all kind of fixed contexts. That's why he never created a system of philosophy, but why he understood philosophy as a practice and not as a system building.
Yes. Well, ways, not ways.
There's a way, exactly.
Yeah. And he also, you could hear that in his refusal. They made the publishers promise that they would never put an index, right, in any of his collected works, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it shows how if you had an index, right? Then if you want to go, oh, well, what is Dasein? And you can look it up, and then go back as if there's something really concealing about that. That would be totally missing the point, because he would say that, and this is very much the case I've noticed in reading Heidegger. And I've come to realize that this reading of Heidegger, in some sense, attuned or afforded a sensibility that like had me be able to respond and participate with the emerging of circling, right? And I didn't realize it at the time, which is really interesting to me, that connection until afterwards, right? Which in some sense has since had it deepen its sensibility, right? But there is very much that sense with Heidegger where it's almost like you're going on a walk around a lake with him, right? And you get around that lake and you realize that the whole time, what you've been talking about the whole time, right, was simply not explicitly in the conversation talking about the thing that emerges that you can now see at the center of the lake, right? It's precisely the thing you weren't talking about. But then right at the end, you get this hint of it showing itself, right? And you realize the not talking about it, right, was the pointing to what couldn't have been said or revealed in that way. And that walking is the point, right? That walking around the lake is the point. Yeah.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
I mean, he even goes in his later years so far that he talks about that you have man muss sich Dinge erschweigen, which is I don't know, you don't have the word in English. Schweigen is a single word for being silent. To be silent in German is an active word which is called schweigen. Ich schweige is I am silent. Und etwas sich erschweigen ist to open something through silence is an active unsealing of something that is bringing us into the presence, but not in a sense of meditation, in that sense, how we usually would think in the Buddhist context.
Yeah.
But very much an in the world, opening of the world, and presencing of the world, in its concreteness. But there's something that always John comes into my mind, which you cannot put into propositional wording. Because it's participatory.
Yes. Right.
That's the whole point. It's a participatory recognition, and not a prepositional recognition. It's the walking around that opens something, and if you make it a preposition, you make something metaphysical out of it.
Totally.
And how to do that without denying language and acknowledging language, and also acknowledging the whole path that we walk through as a culture in building up metaphysics as something that tries to connect with the essence of what everything is about.
Right. And
by going beyond that.
And in essence, by that sense, the kind of the Catholic interpretation of Aristotle, where essence becomes something that you can have, right? It's something that you can grab hold of, or essence in some sense. I don't think essence ever meant that in Aristotle. When you listen from the Greek, right? It's more like essence is like kind of the sounding out of sense, right? Like essence is like the tone, right? Or something like that. It's much more essencing, or more in that direction. I think in the Thomas Aquinas and stuff, you start to hear a different something more object-like, right, with essence, or
that's why, from Heidegger's point of view, the scholastic, at least the scholastic interpretation of it is the biggest crime itself, because you make out of the essencing the biggest object.
Yes, right.
And so you make it to the most opposite of what it is.
Yeah.
And that's why he's so close to
opposite of what it is. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking, I want to hang out with that. Like, yeah, you make it the most opposite of what it is. Like, so the clearer oh, that's so interesting. You can just hear, like, okay, you can hear the whole thing about technology, right? Like, you can just feel it coming on board. Like, the moment that you say that, like, it's the most unlike what it is, yet what shows itself for me is a clarity and a misappropriation of what it is, but something I can simultaneously grab hold of and use, right? Then just multiply that at various levels of complexity, and then you have like Facebook, right?
Because what got started there, and I think that's what he sees as the crime. You would put in a way, you nailed God.
Yeah.
You nailed him down versus ungraspable ungraspableness. What this is about, all.
That's what Putin's sitting over there going, like, sitting at his church, looking over at the West, going, "That's what you did."
It's true.
Right?
It's true, yeah.
And so you are So now, when I want to go back to something that you said. You just said, yeah, and you said, okay, if we let go of this mistranslation of Wesen and essence, right, and see it as essencing, and then you said, in reference to that, the question now is, how do we go about enacting in the world, right, in terms of this openness, right, and let go and not get caught up in that, what would become the Cartesian, all the Cartesian assumptions and technology and all that. And when I heard, like, it's funny when you said that question, the question now is, how do you do that without falling prey to this? I immediately pictured you, right, in your, maybe the early days, maybe still, right, in working out the emergent dialogues, like being inside of your head, looking at the situation with this background question, like, okay, how do we relate with that thing that just happened that doesn't fall into this assumption of me and you and it, and like, how do I approach this? How do we approach this in such a way that it stays true to this essencing, or this openness, or the fourfold? I just, when you said, that really was strong for me when you said that, imagining you, in some sense, having that, okay, how do we do this as a guiding, maybe inaudible question or context from which you've been working out what emergent dialogue is?
Interesting, because in fact it worked out differently. Because I, for quite some years, let go of Heidegger and practiced this dialogue without kind of referencing it to my Heideggerian background.
Yeah, very Heideggerian of you.
It just happened that way. And there was this practice that also in the spiritual community where basically there was a practice about, let's call it collective presencing.
Yeah.
Whereas where we are kind of very intrigued by this third factor that shows up in the conversation that you're also describing, that something opens up that has its own ownness, that's beyond myself and beyond and we are all participating in. Yeah. It's not even just held by the participants, it's also beyond the participants, it's held by whole presence, but it's articulated. And there's a recognition of something that has its own intelligence.
Yeah, its own ownness. I like that. I like just that's really says it to me.
Yeah.
Ownness.
And that seems to be something that is very significant also because it transcends my experience of being separate to you in a conversation. So basically, there's something where we are together in, where I am. It's both at the same time. I am Thomas, you a guy, but there's also something that is not that you can't put against each other in this. Yeah. I'm talking to you, you talking to me. That's part of it, but there's also just the presence unfolding through our conversation.
Yeah. Yes.
It seems to be significant and seems to be also spiritually significant because it transcends separation and the idea of separation in a very concrete way. You also could call it enacted non-duality, using a more Eastern inspired term.
Non-duality, enacted non.
There's something where we are very here and very whoever we are, but there's something that's not separate, that's not dual, that's unfolding. That seems to be meaningful and important.
Totally. And that
is going. And is also going against the subject-object divide that Heidegger is very much also kind of trying to think beyond. At least the way I read him.
That's the way I read him too. And this enacted, you said enacted non-dwelling. So just
non-dwelling.
Yes, just to track the non-dwelling, right? The enacted non-dwelling. So there's the ownmost, right? That there's this presence, that there's that, like you and I come together, right? And sometimes I'm me and you're you, and then we come together. And it's not like I go away and you go away, but there's this presence that unfolds between the two of us, right?
Yeah.
That then can start to actually fold back on us, right? And start to determine us in some sense, or constitute us, right? In that way. And what you're saying is catching sight of that, this thing, what did you call it? The own that's ownmost? What was that term? There was something own or ownmost. I loved it.
You mean that it has its own ownness?
Yes, its own ownness. God damn, that's a great, I love that. Its own ownness. That describes so many things I don't have words for. Its own ownness. Yeah. And it's this own ownness that you started to experientially catch a sight of in this collective intelligence, right? Groups in the what was it, a monastery that you were in California? It was
that was on the East Coast. That was in Massachusetts, but it was a kind of a monastery thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And at that time in your life, it wasn't like you were like thinking much about Heidegger.
No.
Yeah.
It was out of some reasons that at some point I started to read Heidegger again.
Yeah.
And I started particularly to read the late Heidegger about the Ereignis.
Mm-hmm.
The English the translation sometimes is the event, sometimes it's ennownment.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
They made up this English word ennownment.
Yeah.
To build after the German word.
Yeah.
In this,
Yeah.
he tries to think that it's a very cryptic book. But it's a real trip to read it. even if you don't understand it, it's a real trip.
Yeah.
Because you see how he permanently goes somewhere where he's beyond himself and doesn't really get what he tries to articulate, but he tries again and again and again. It's also it's not a real book. It's a manuscript.
Right. Yes, totally. It's like a tracking of this attempt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And at the end, you don't quite know if he ever made it.
Yeah.
But the it that he didn't made is somehow present, right?
Yeah.
In these attempts.
Yeah, and that at some point, because I had read that book before, and I at least I started it, and it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But at that point, all of a sudden, rightfully or not rightfully, so I got a sense that I'm with him in this.
Yeah.
That I'm not saying that I understood, but that I'm with him. When you feel you're on the inside of his writing.
Yeah.
Not on the outside of it.
Yeah.
And it was the practice that changed it.
Yes. I was just going to say, is what you're saying, by being with him, when you read it a second time, after having done this in different ways yourself, right, without it being as distinct as something like that, and then you read Heidegger and you're noticing, reading it, you can feel him go like this, and you're like, oh, that, like, yeah. I recognize that, like I'm with him there. Yeah. Huh. This is very, it's like, this is very participatory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very participatory. This is very difficult to bring. What we're talking about right now, like, strikes me as, yeah, very unpropositional of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that's the main point, that is participatory, because part of how I understand this practice is also that it only works when participation opens up, and you see this in the conversation when all of a sudden we are together in participating in something. There's a reference point in consciousness. You can try to bring certain names to it. You can call it field awareness or whatever, where people are aware of something, and there's a shared inner awareness, and then you start to talk about it, and you're not talking about ideas. You're talking about a shared experience of something. And then the conversation becomes very interesting, because then you can experiment with language, how language works with this unfolding, opening, how it opens something or it closes something, and in that sense, you mold it as you talk about it, and the talking, the wording becomes part of the practice. The word that came to me, it's part of the invocation. And in that, there's something that's opening up that's just very powerful. It's a very powerful recognition of something.
You went like this. I just noticed that. I just noticed that, like, you had a completely different facial. You went, something opens up. Yeah. this is what you're saying just strikes, I'm noticing just a familiarity with I'm just noticing a familiarity with what you're talking about, right? Of, in some sense, noticing, you know, in working with groups like myself, it's a little bit more like, and this is the part that's very difficult to teach in the conventional sense of the word, right? But this non-propositional sense, like that there's a quote in Heidegger that it's almost been like a mantra of mine for 20 years, right? Which is, you know, do not listen to me, or let me give you a hint on how to listen to the lecture. Instead of listening to a series of proposition, instead follow the movement of showing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's precise. It's like he says, he didn't say follow the showing, right? He said follow the movement of showing. So there's these two things happening at once that you're following, right? There's the showing that's also a movement. There's a movement showing, a showing movement, right? This is a very non-metaphysical kind of thing, right? And that sense that I'm imagining when you say to invoke this, right? Some of this language invokes it, right? And then you can start to follow it and experiment, and it starts to have something starts to open up that we can be affected by and bring to language. And but a logos of some kind starts to gather. So a new kind of gathering starts to gather.
And we're experimenting to find appropriate language to be able to participate in through language, not to kind of define something, but language is a form of participation. And that's part of what I find endlessly fascinating, to find wording that shows something that allows a finer understanding of what we're doing in this. There's one word, and it has nothing to do with Heidegger in some sense. It's not a word that he's using, but the word synergetic intelligence or synergetic intuition opens up something for me that I find very helpful to open this space, to see that when we have a dialogue between people and everyone comes in with the world, and the world, through our identity, they have their otherness, but with the right attention, you can meet in a way where you find these points of synergy. Basically, this worlds, they connect, and something comes out of that crystallizes in a different way. And all of a sudden, you're in something that holds all the differences that we are, but it synergizes it into something that creates a togetherness of that. It doesn't let go of the differentiation, but it crystallizes in a different way because you allow it to come together in this.
Yes.
And that is something that I find tremendously fascinating, because when that happens, and that's why I find that the term synergetic intelligence is a very appropriate one, that there's an intelligence opening up that I don't have access to. it's a shared intelligence. It's like you connect different circuits of intelligence, and you connect them, and something is building up that is only able to through this different elements that participate in that.
Yeah.
And it's like seeing through a shared eye in this.
Yeah.
And I find this very very significant, because all of a sudden it's not kind of like in a debate where I see something and you see something, and then we kind of talk it out.
Yeah.
But it's more a shared exercise to see together and see something that I would not be able to see without you.
Yeah.
And I think in every really deep conversation this happens.
Yeah. Yes. And as you're talking, I'm noticing what on some level, I think what I noticed as you were talking about these things, I noticed at some point we'll call it a normal way of understanding what you were saying. I got clear that wasn't going to do it, but it wasn't like a bad thing. It was more like it just a signal to go, shh, right? Like my attention just got really diffuse in some sense, or like widened. And then the interactions of the terms that you were using started to create a sense of a constellation of sorts, if you will, right? And I think what I heard you say is that this synergistic of intelligence, right? How I think I hear that is something like, there's something really familiar about it. There's these nodes, we'll say nodes at different points or ways of intelligence operating. And then the through line somehow reveals itself, but it reveals itself through, we start to share the eye of, I don't know, you could say a meta intelligence that all of those shared, right? But it becomes what we're looking through, and is what reveals those intelligences as those intelligences, but with from some kind of sense of identification with it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and one of the things I at the same time I can kind of hear kind of like down to the left and around a bit, like down here is what you said in the beginning, right? Or a few sentences back or a few paragraphs back of freeing language, right? Freeing language, and opening it up, right? And I kind of feel like being up here, looking at this synergy, right? I'm present to like this relationship to down here somewhere, like this being possible as a kind of a releasement of some kind, right? That's the ride I just went on with you.
No, I very much can relate to that, because the releasement are as far the way I see it is we have to rewire our thinking, more than our thinking, our being in the world completely.
Yeah.
And it has to do with our individuation and holding the world in this individuated perspective that creates a certain wiring of perception that is intimately connected to my eye sense.
Yeah.
Which again, because it has to be said, is an important achievement that we created that. I don't see it in itself something bad, but there's a limitation in that.
Yeah.
Because this wired to separate identity creates a certain perspective of I-ness and otherness.
Yeah.
which is the subject object divide in that.
Right.
And this V space allows us to rewire the way we think, be, relate in a way that is synergetic and is not hardwired to my separate identity. But for that, and that's part of the difficulty, I have to let go of this identity investment. I have to open up to this other force. That's opening up in the conversation and be trustful to that. And the way I see it, we are in the process collectively to learn to trust that there's a different way to be together that's beyond separation, and where we can learn. And dialogue is a form of learning to rewire us so that this other capacity gets stabilized or finds its own way how to be. Like we learned at some point to be individuals. That's part of what we also did in history of human consciousness.
Totally.
We are in a certain turning point again, where we rewire us again to transcend this individuation, include and transcend. And find how this synergetics field is opening up that allows this through line to come in a different way, the way you're describing it.
It's funny, I just got really I got moved and struck by what keeps coming back again. It just came back again, is just this sense of the time that we're in, and you in particular getting more of what you're up to with this, right? And what we just talked about the West, and Moscow being the new, the considered the new Rome, or the third Rome, right? But in a regressive sense, responding to the postmodern nihilism, basically. And here you are, right at the edge of that nihilism, right? In some sense, attempting a not a regressive response, right? And so kind of just getting all of that, and then looking at you and kind of feeling how much your heart's in, like how much of your heart is in this. I can feel how meaningful it is to you. I don't know if I could feel all of how meaningful it is to you, but I can get a sense of it, right? And feel how I know it's there is a respect from you. And then everything from you being right here, right now, talking about this very thing, finding yourself in this situation, right? Where Germany has just pulled back from like a commitment to dialogue. You being in this position where you have a sense that this may be the possibility, right? That of a new way of being with each other. That's not going back into war and all of that, right? And it's so delicate. One of the things I'm appreciating about it is like, this feels so delicate to me, right? And like just what you were saying of like I would imagine the challenge that I sense with, and I may in my own way really share with you about these kind of subtle, delicate, yet if they can, you use the words, if they can stabilize, if we can find a way to stabilize them, or find their way of being stable is probably the better word for it. There's a sense of that this could be very constituting, right? Just like the I that at one point was probably really unstable, but then kind of stabilized, right? That maybe this is another thing, and there's something else like this, right? An evolution of that, right? And then here you are, you're housing a refugee. Like, oh, this is all that's hitting my heart being with you,
but also to say this what is happening, as I see it, is popping up in many places at the same time right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what we are doing with Emergent Dialogue is basically one laboratory where we try to respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this we-space culture, that dialogical culture that is happening in so many ways right now, that it appears to be that evolution is looking for its ways. It's looking for landing places, and that different playgrounds where people respond to it in their own ways, and they have all their own capacities and their own shortcomings and their own strengths. But it's kind of the evolution of consciousness is trying itself out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter where it comes through. It just looks in these different places to come through in some way and find its own way to stabilize itself in the end. That's what the whole thing is about.
Yeah, totally. Well, what I heard you just do right there, right, is in some sense, I think what I heard you just do right there was, it reminded me the way that you just described the movement as a whole had the very similar sensibility of describing what you do in the actual practicing of the emergent dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's why the dialogue of dialogues is part of what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same thing on a different scale.
Yeah, totally. And the thing that we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dialoguing of dialogue. Yeah. Yeah. so much here. I'm curious about one of the things that we talked about, like in our last conversation, was that there was something you were getting about the I thou. So I think what you said is in circling, it struck you that what's going on in circling is something about this deep sense of the I thou, right? Being really present. And I think you were talking about that, and you were getting some things, I think, in the conversation, right, about that, which was informative.
It still is with me.
Yeah.
And it was describing the way, I don't exactly remember how you put it, but you described how one is with the other.
Yeah.
And how one is with the other before and beyond the identification point of the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
How in this intimacy opens up.
Yeah.
Where the other world is open, but because it is just in some way free from the self-identification that the world is usually holding itself.
Yes. Yes.
There seems to be, that's at least the way I heard you, also a freeing of the self-identification without that I don't have to disappear. The opposite. I can be free in the way I am without being held with this point of identification that holds everything strict in a very strict way together. Because of the capacity of the other to be with me in my world without being identified with me.
Right.
But there's something freeing up in the way I can be myself.
Yes. Yes.
And that seems to be...
Yes. That withness admits already of a togetherness that it finds itself in. Yeah. Right. And in that sense, it realizes, you're right. That withness that one realizes, like, oh, you get me, you're with me.
Yeah.
Right, is a finding oneself in the togetherness that its personality, its self-structure, all of that precedes, right, or proceeds, right. In that sense, it's this, and then I think that's where you get where it gets really emotional for people, right? this kind of sense of belongingness that is like, it's very much a sense of where people realize, like, one of the first things is they feel moved. And part of the movement is because there's this heartfelt connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this profound grief that comes along with it as well, right? Often, because part of what's revealed in that experience is the recognition that I haven't been experiencing this, right? Like, in fact, some people have it. Some people experience it as like they have an insight, like, in fact, everything that I call me is predicated on this not happening, right? Like it's a little bit. I'm just seeing that over and over and over again, and I think you're right, because there's something about, we teach some of the emergent language in circling has been things like really getting your world, right? This sense of like, it's really important, like there's your world going on, like, and getting your world, like, and being in there with your world, right? That getting, again, presupposes an access that admits a togetherness, right? That is concealed, but reveals itself as possible and is present in that sense. In that sense, it's like it gets at that level of the I thou. And because I've often thought with circling, and this is where it's kind of difficult. This is where it gets really subtle, right? And it is where my experience with teaching circling is, this isn't a skill, it's a capacity, right, that one can develop in having, but it's not like directly teachable. It's something like, at best, it's transmittable. It's this way when you go to a country and you learn the language and all of that, right? And you come back to your other country and people hear the accent of that country in you, right? But you don't recall picking up an accent, right? Like, you find out you have an accent. It's something like that, this sensibility of the I thou, and being able to respond to it. Yeah, but you're right. I think the I thou is something like a primordial structure. And so there's a way that we could talk about relationship where there's me and there's you, and we come together, and then we come together and we form this thing called a relationship. But this other way where there's me and you, and without having any history, right, we can reveal the way in which we're already related, right? This revelation of the already related, revealing the relationship, not creating rapport, but revealing it, right? Disclosing it, if you will.
It's interesting, because that's an aspect I have not seen in the other conversation that we had, because that goes beyond in some way it goes beyond the I thou.
Yeah.
It has this interrelatedness of all of that. Sorry to use the same word again, as its ownness.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And it's funny because just that in terms of, if I were to say, there's something deeply familiar about everything that you're saying and what you're doing, right? Like, I'm like, the words that you're using, and mostly the way of showing, the way showing moves, and your way of articulating that, and kind of being with your presence, something very familiar. And I would say that the distinctness is something like very similar phenomena, but I would imagine, I kind of get this sense when we're talking about emergent dialogue, as I understand it through you, there's a sense of it being kind of up here. And like the thing that I think, as I was just describing, kind of circling, is a little bit more like, I imagine it down here.
I can relate to that because particularly as you're mentioning this now with this relatedness, what comes to me is that it is the same wholeness, but somewhere from the perspective of what we focus on in emergent dialogue, it's inward out. There's something where in the emergent dialogue, it's very much about the field that's opening up. What you're emphasizing is the relatedness. And it's these two dimensions belong together, but they are not identical. One is the inside of the other. One is the outside of the other. One has relatedness does not work. It does not even show up with I thou. If I don't see you in your world, there cannot be relatedness in that sense. While emergent dialogue is focusing on the wholeness of the field. That is part of it, but it's the other side of it. And that's where I have a hunch that there's a complementary relationship between the two practices.
Totally.
As I said the other time, I also think that there is a weakness or a possible shadow side of emergent dialogue because of this emphasis on the wholeness. That you lose the particularities in the wholeness. Right. And it seems that what circling is doing is working the other way around.
I would say I'm wondering if I kind of took that dialectic, right, and that you're saying that it kind of reveals a weakness, and if I go, okay, if I take that over here, and I was like, well, is there a corollary weakness with circling? And then all my complaints about this, like all my litany of complaints about circling, right, and the community around it, and all of my kind of pet peeves and all that kind of stuff come up, and it is something like there's a tendency I notice with circling to fall into a certain kind of psychologicalism, right? A certain kind of almost new age, borrowing kind of terms that end up not being that meaningful, that don't really say anything, that presuppose like things about healing and trauma and all this kind of stuff. I would say that that's the part of it where I give around and I'm like, that's what, like that stuff bugs me. So I would imagine,
because what emergent dialogue does is nearly an anti-psychological positioning. Which has its strength, but also its weakness. But there's something where that's even a way how I think about it. That after basically 100 years of psychology, if you start with Freud, or you can start with Nietzsche, you can start with Freud, depending how you see that. But where from the modernist objectivist world, this subjective inner world is opening up, and it started with Freud, Schopenhauer, but with Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, but Freud was really the archetypal opening of that, and Jung, of course, that. And then we have now 100 years of psychotherapy,
right?
And all this,
right?
And it created a lot, but it also creates its own pitfalls.
Yeah, it really does. Totally. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
And in that, I see what emergent dialogue does is a dialectical move beyond that.
Right.
Again.
And move beyond that in some sense that it retrieves the ontological sense, not just the psychological sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally.
But the point is, you only can do that when you fully also integrate.
Yeah.
Let's call it the psychological sphere.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't do that, you create a hollowness.
Yeah.
Not a wholeness, a hollowness.
Yeah. 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 The spelling matters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I see it needs to integrate on a higher level, because otherwise it stays psychological.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it does need to integrate.
Yeah. 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 That's one of the things about like what it's like what we could say that the psychological frame gone wild, right? Kind of that when that takes over. I've noticed that like I've noticed at times in my life when I've gotten into kind of understanding like psychoanalysis and like Freud and Jung, and you get those theories, and then you look out of the world and all of a sudden everybody, right, is exemplifying these like pathologies, and these, you just see it everywhere, and it can be so, your whole world can be summarized as various interactions of personality complexes, right, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's gotta, there's something particular about the psychological frame that does that. It seems easier than any other kind of identification, right? So, which I would imagine exemplifies it, both its power, right, and its depth at a certain level, right, but also its shadow in that sense. Yeah.
Because it has the power to become completely inflationary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does it. That's part of our postmodern culture.
Yeah.
Everything is just basically, I mean, my woundedness never ends.
Yeah, totally. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. Yes. And you can see that underneath all of that kind of like extreme green, kind of green meme. I don't know, you call it wokeism or something like that. All the extreme versions of that. You can just see the perniciousness of it, right? It's taking hold. And I have to say that like that really is one of the things that I'm very watchful of in these communities, of practice and this kind of thing. And it's one of the things I'm appreciating, what seems to be gathering itself, in which this conversation, I would say, is part of this gathering that is also self-aware of that, right? Like self-aware of those tendencies, and for now seems relatively free of it, right? And maybe even integrative of it, right? Yeah. It's so good getting to know you, my friend.
It's very delightful.
Yeah, it's been really just this is our second conversation. I'm enjoying dialoguing with you and talking with you, and also just kind of just your shit. I think it's so interesting that both of us in some sense have on our own stumbled upon these dialogical practices, and had this kind of not exactly direct connection with Heidegger.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what I'm hearing with you too. You came back around with Heidegger after having read Heidegger, and I was like in the midst of it, was reading Heidegger. I didn't even understand why I was reading Heidegger, right? And then come later, I'm seeing now. That's just it. I've been a little bit on my own with that. So there's
I can say the same. I can say the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there are not many people who really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to kind of hang it on Heidegger.
Yeah, you're right.
But the point is, I find his thinking very helpful for what my desire is about. That's all. I find it very helpful. I'm not saying that there are not different ways one also can think about that.
Yeah,
but,
totally.
But I find it very enlightening, very helpful,
Right,
and very instructive.
right. Yeah, ditto, totally. In fact, if we did hang it on Heidegger gets concealed. You could hear him go, no.
I mean,
Yeah.
You want to have another kind of strange turn for this conversation that connects this what we are talking about right now again with the Russia thing.
Yeah.
Part of the ideologues behind Putin are deeply Heideggerian.
Huh. Yeah.
There's one particular
Yes.
guy, he's called Alexander Dugin.
Yep, Dugin. Which again gets a lot right.
Say again?
Which again gets a profound amount right.
Yes, and scarily so.
Yes.
It's really, it bothers me.
Yeah.
It's unbearable because I mean, Dugin is a fascist. Period.
Yeah.
But he's. But I can't deny. I can't say that he doesn't understand what he's talking about. He has a deep understanding of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So this is kind of very irritating, and but that's what it is.
Yeah. You know, I don't know enough about Dugin, right, to say yes or no to the fascism, other than what I hear is his influence on Putin sounds very fascist.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced that one can call him that.
Yeah.
Although he makes a big point, basically, that he calls it the fourth political theory, which is basically beyond liberalism, beyond conservatism, and beyond fascism.
Right. Totally.
That's his point. But anyway, we don't have to go into that.
Yeah.
Kind of
I'd love that. Is maybe at a different time we can go into him. I know I know a scholar of his work I've been meaning to reach out to and talk to about this, because that's been bothering me too. Yeah, the very thing is bothering to me too. Like, because I actually came upon his work not realizing who he was, and started reading it. And I was like, whoa, this is quite, especially the stuff that he talks about in terms of identity being dislocated from place, right? And the whole, this connection that he has with neoliberalism, like becoming everything, thereby there's no place anymore. I was like, I could just immediately see shopping malls and sprawled out like subdivisions and like the whole thing. So I kind of can't, but I didn't realize who I was reading until after kind of being kind of struck by his thought, and then finding out afterwards, like, oh, this is the guy that with, it's like, whoa.
I mean, because he's of course a political theorist, but even what he says about the political subject, he makes the point that every political theory has a political subject. So in socialism it's the class, in fascism it's the race, and in liberalism it's the individual. So his project, what he calls the fourth political theory, he says the political subject is the Dasein. And I find it interesting. I find it interesting.
I tell you what, I can't imagine, like, I don't know, but I can't imagine Putin sitting down and reading him and understanding him. I don't know.
No. In fact, I realized, because I was in the press right now, that Putin does have another political theorist who died in the end of the 50s. He was a political theorist who basically was in the Russian Civil War on the side of the Tsarist.
Yeah.
He was a fascist theorist at that time. Ilyin, Alexander Ilyin is his name.
Yeah.
And he is much more Hegelian thinker.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And Putin seems to be, I don't know what Putin's intellectual capacity is. I have no idea. I don't think it's really anything, but I think that's more his thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But not that I know, it's all just assumptions.
So let's do this again. And we got
May I ask you a couple of questions?
Yeah.
One is what I wrote in the email, that we make this Evolve Live events.
That's great.
In fact, today my partner, do you know Zach Stein?
Has she been on John's channel?
Together with me.
Yeah,
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But do you know Zach Stein?
Zach Stein? I have yet to meet him individually, but I'm very familiar.
Elizabeth right now is doing an Evolve Live event with him.
Oh, fantastic!
As we are talking.
Oh, fantastic! Right on.
Yeah, they know each other since a long while. They met each other in Harvard.
Yeah. Didn't Zach? I think Zach started to do something, work in collaboration with pretty recently, Gaffney.
With Gaffney. In fact, he's very close with Gaffney.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, which is it's a story in itself. But
yeah, it's a story in itself, totally.
But they're obviously very close. And I find Gaffney difficult, but I really appreciate Zach Stein's work very much. I think what he does about education, he's one of the upcoming thinkers about a lot of things that's going on right now. Clearly. I really appreciate him.
Clearly. Yeah, he's something. He's really something.
Yeah. So this is one thing I would like to do, and if I may send you a calendar date and find out. And there's one other thing. In fact, Elizabeth is doing right now, and it has to do with the Ukraine.
Huh.
In 1 month, we want to do a one-day event that we call Dialogue is Peace.
Yeah.
Where we want to bring together, basically, we want to create a dialogical field, if possible, that bridges East and West.
Yeah.
And also brings the global South in.
Yeah.
And uses also different forms of dialogue and collaboration. Do you know Thomas Hübel?
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So Thomas and I, we know each other for a long time because we know the Austrians. Before he was a spiritual teacher. So his drama work we would like to bring in.
Right.
Do you know the global peacemakers of Roger Glassman, Bernie Glassman? Do you
familiar?
know?
I'm familiar.
I mean, he died 2 years ago, but they do something that they call a bearing witness practice. In fact, a very powerful thing. One of the core practices that they meditate for a week in Auschwitz or things like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we want to bring different dialogical practice together and create this as a kind of being with each other, being with the drama, bearing witness. And if someone of Circling would be part of this, ideally you, but it doesn't have to be you if you're busy. We would appreciate it very much to bring this together as a dialogical field, as a response to this war thing.
Yeah, totally. Are we want to do it in person?
On Zoom.
On Zoom. Yeah.
the idea, because we do a lot on big events on Zoom.
Yeah.
So this will be with at least several hundred people, if not several thousand people.
Okay. Yeah.
And
That
we do
sounds
it
great.
in different spaces. If this is something we could have you in, that would be
That'd be great.
Would be a cool thing.
That'd be great. Sign me up.
Cool.
Yeah.
That was a question. And I will write you more about it in the email.
Yeah, great. Good getting to know you, my friend.
Very good to know you. I really appreciate that, and I could not make your last weekend course, but I really I want to inform myself, because I think there's this dimension that we just talked about.
Yeah.
I find helpful for me to lean into it.
They're great. Yeah, we have one of those going on pretty much every 4 to 6 weeks. So
cool.
Yeah,
I will find one.
Yeah.
I will find one.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, my friend.
I'll let you go. I hear you. Take care.